Good morning. Heather, I want to get started in just a second, but before we do, I want to say thank you to all of you. When I have a problem that I can't solve in my organization, I find my HR partner who's here today, Diana, and I just want to recognize that the work that you do is hard, and I am grateful. So thank you. You should all clap for yourselves. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing.
Just so you know, Lauren, our families don't appreciate that same sort of HR care. My husband reminds me all the time, I'm not your employee.
You know, mine does too. So we have that in common. Heather, I'd like to do a little bit of a temperature check as we get started here today. Being a healthcare professional is not easy either, right? It can be really rewarding, but it's a hard job. How are your teams doing? What's changed post-pandemic? And what are you doing to build that culture for workers at Intermountain?
Well, thanks for asking. I mean, a lot of stuff has changed even since the pandemic because we've gone through a big merger as well. Just to level set a little bit, Intermountain Healthcare is a large integrated health system here based in Salt Lake City. One of the top health systems in the country now. We're the 11th largest health system in the country. We have 67,000 people and some change sitting in 7 different states across the Intermountain West. And like any healthcare company, the pandemic was very hard. It's comparably hard to teachers and healthcare workers. I mean, it just was very stressful. These are folks who had to show up in facilities every single day when the rest of us were, squalled away at home with masks, and they had to show up and do the work. People were not always nice to healthcare workers in the pandemic. And, it just was a really scary, ambiguous, uncertain time. Every state had different ways of dealing with things, which made it very confusing because we are an industry that's rooted in best practices. And best practices weren't always followed the same across the country. That was really hard. From a staffing challenge, we saw an explosion of what we call travel agency workers, particularly in the spaces of nursing and other clinical jobs. That changed the dynamic of employment inside of healthcare. It changed relationships because the travel workers, came and paid nurses 2.5 times their salary, and then really price gouged healthcare organizations. Now, I think they really took advantage of some things that the industry didn't respond to appropriately. When I look back now, I can see, our nurses wanted a different type of wage structure. They wanted flexibility. They wanted autonomy. They wanted to be involved in what we see today, gig work, that, I want to be able to choose my schedule. I think had we been better to respond to that prior to the pandemic, because we heard that, but we're a very legacy, traditional thinking industry that's like, well, this has always worked for our patients. Coming out of the pandemic, we can look back now and say the pandemic is in our rearview mirrors, not that it's not happening. I think people are learning a new normal. How do you embrace what you had during the pandemic or what you hated during the pandemic? And, we're learning that some things are just never going to change. People still want autonomy and flexibility and being able to choose their schedule in a different way. People want to be more mobile. And we see that in our professional workers as much as we see it in clinical workers. And wages over that time period, year over year, we've increased almost 40% in wages. So that in itself creates a different dynamic. I think we've put a greater emphasis on mental health, not only in our own organization, but I see it across the country, and I think that's a good thing. We talk about it more, and it's real in the world we live in, and it's real in our industry that we work in. And so really putting an emphasis on that inside of our own walls. How do we take care of our people in the same ways we're taking care of our communities? That's been a big focus area for us, is mental health and wellness. Because if we can't have our own people live our mission, how can we expect to deliver the mission in the community? So,
yeah, thank you. I'd like to shift gears. You said you've got 60,000 and change employees. How many vacancies at any given time?
Well, I'll tell you, at the height of the pandemic, we had 6,500 job openings.
Okay.
It felt really overwhelming to our recruiters, to our leaders. There were just lots of openings. Today, we're hovering around 4,200 job openings. What we realize, and I love the introduction, just around AI and how we've got to think differently. I'm not sure we'll ever be able to fill those 4,200 jobs. And we're really looking to say, how do we redesign work? How do we use technology appropriately? Because the best time to change jobs is when it's open, because there's no harm to a person, right? Mm-hmm. If we have 4,200 jobs, how can we take that to 3,500 and not harm a person by a change in a role? And that's really what we're putting a lot of emphasis and thought on, is redesign of work.
You've also talked, you and I have known each other for some time, about partnerships as being key to helping fill some of those openings that you do want to fill, right? Or to find, some solutions to the labor shortages. Can you speak more to what Intermountain is doing in that space?
Yeah, and this is, it's super exciting because it's fulfilling work to partner in the community. There are some jobs that are just, at least for the foreseeable future, are not going to go away, right? A phlebotomist. We're going to have phlebotomists all across all of the industry, or all of the geographies that we serve. We developed a partnership with a couple of refugee organizations here in the Valley. It was a very hard entry-level position to hire. And we found a lot of success partnering with the refugee community, individuals who had settled here in Salt Lake, some of them with clinical certifications in other countries that weren't honored here in the United States, but they wanted to get into healthcare because that's what they loved. But we've been able to fill a lot of vacancies with that partnership. We also have partnered with community colleges and technical colleges. It's interesting, pretty much any role that ends in tech, imaging tech, EKG tech, phlebotomy, we could hire people on the spot. It's just clinical support jobs are jobs that we could just hire on the spot. So we've really increased our partnerships with high schools. There's a lot of grant money available in every state that we sit in. I could almost keep a full-time grant writer on my team because the money is available. And it really helps us because we don't have to spend operational dollars to train people to do work inside of our organization. We put them to work and then it changes the trajectory of their life, right? Because, they get into an entry-level job and we have so many education programs that we can continue to help promote someone. So we've really embraced skills-based learning in partnering with technical schools, high schools, all across the Valley with community partnerships. And it also has helped with our diversity, non-traditional pathways into healthcare of people that haven't ever thought about healthcare as a career.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. And we heard about that in the opening too, right? DEI is being reframed, certainly here in Utah, right? At least at the statewide level. There was a bill in this last legislative session, which recently concluded, that would have put DEI controls on private business. It failed. But I'm interested in how you are navigating, as a major employer here in Utah, right? You can't kind of hide over there in the corner and say, hey, we're fine, no one's going to pay attention to us. How are you navigating the current climate with respect to your approach and Intermountain's approach to DEI?
It's really important part of our mission. Our mission is to help people live the healthiest lives possible. So equity is at the core of our mission in everything that we do. First of all, I'll say I respect the legislative process and we participate in that. So even that bill, we provided feedback to the bill and we feel like that's part of our responsibility as a large employer. It's unfortunate that a lot of the things that were meant to help marginalized populations sort of got off the rails over the last couple of years. And I think what we've really tried to do inside of our organization is keep it around ensuring that we hire people that represent the communities we serve, because that's good for everybody. It's good for our organization and it's good for the patients we serve. And then the second thing that we focus on my team is a sense of belonging. It's less divisive because what our intent is to bring a diverse group of people to work inside of Intermountain, but we really focus on what it means to come to work at Intermountain. When you show up, do we respect who you are? Do we respect your thoughts and opinions? Do we create an inclusive environment where you can speak up and dress, appropriately to your culture, and be able to thrive and grow in the organization? So we found a lot of success in that. We actually have our diversity efforts split out in a couple of ways. One is a focus on employees, which rolls up to my area, so caregiver belonging and inclusion. And then we also have a big focus on health equity, right? Mm-hmm. Eliminating disparities in care across all of the communities that we serve. So it's a big part of who we are. And I think diversity is a very large definition. I'm diverse. I'm a female leader who had parents that did not have high school educations. Mm-hmm. My dad was a coal miner. My mom was stay home. I am part of a diverse population. I think when we see diversity through that lens, that there's not one person that doesn't show up to a table that has a different opinion, a different experience to share, a different story. Yeah. And each of those stories actually just create an incredible fabric for an organization. So we've put a lot of emphasis on belonging and inclusion, really trying to increase applicant diversity, but not so much a focus on hiring. Because ultimately, if we do it right, it'll show up in the hiring.
Yeah, great, thank you. Let's stay with the legislative component for just a minute. Laws have changed at the national and local levels regarding reproductive health and personal health, specifically for women. This may be a challenge that's unique to you in the healthcare space, but is that impacting your ability to recruit? Are folks saying, oof, not sure what's happening in Utah, I don't know that I want to head over there?
I think at the very beginning of it, there probably were, I sat in a few CHRO circles here locally in Utah, and there were companies that actually said that their candidates turned them away because they did not want to come to Utah. I've not personally heard that that's affected our recruiting. I will tell you maybe a different lens for our healthcare workers is they're the deliverer of these services. So they care on a different side of things too, and we hope that our caregivers get involved in advocating for legislative processes. Like I said, we respect the legislative process, but we have a recruiting side of this and we have a care delivery side of this. And, there's a lot of tension in this space, but I think what we always tell our employees is go back to our mission and go back to best practices. And that's really what we're there to advocate for, is best practices and mission. But we've not really had anyone that I know that's actually turned a job away because of a practice in Utah. It's often difficult for caregivers to navigate because we have to tell them you have to suspend judgment as a deliverer of care. And that's becoming harder these days.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's becoming harder to be an individual who thinks about what I think outside of work and what the care delivery model is. And that is a difficult space to live in healthcare.
So difficult spaces, let's talk more about that. Okay. Over the next 5 years, biggest need or biggest challenge that you see in your work?
Probably a handful. I would say remote work is still something that if you read the news, there's different opinions, right? Depending on the CEO of the organization, because this drive starts at the top. Luckily, our CEO and I lead this for our organization, are very open to remote work. So we have not shifted our plans around remote work. It creates an interesting dynamic because really RN and bedside clinical people, this is not something they can completely do. So we have to understand that a one-size-fits-all does not fit in our work anymore. We've got to address, if you think about it, at Intermountain Health, we have 67,000 employees. Our youngest worker, full-time, 17 years old. Our oldest full-time worker is 92. Okay? 5 generations in the workforce.
Joe Biden could come work for you.
He could come work. He actually could. Good. Actually, he'd be young compared to our full-time 92-year-old. But I think that's another really important factor that employers have to think about is one size fits all doesn't work. And so the remote strategy, we have doubled down on that. We have employees in 48 states. We have leaders who are leading teams in states that we don't have any physical footprint in. So that's very different. But if you read the headlines on some places like, remote workers are ruining culture, it's ruining connection, it's ruining communication. I think you probably should listen to the Gen Y, Gen Z. I don't know that they feel the same way. And I remember there was a time in my career where I was like, the millennials are coming. Well, now they're more than 50% of our organization. And I do think we have to listen. I think another big area outside of remote work that we're tackling is AI. How does that fit into healthcare? I mean, I've really tried to lean into it personally. I use ChatGPT very regularly just to kind of play with it, in my personal life and my professional life. And I think what I tell my employees and our organization is, there'll be as many jobs created as that we move away from. I mean, it's just going to change the dynamic. Every job is not going to go away, but I promise you, every job is going to change. Mm-hmm. Every job is going to change a little bit because of AI. And so how do we get in front of it? And then how do we use it? I think we get focused on the scary parts of it. And maybe really to lean into it, you have to focus on what's just the low-hanging fruit that we could use it to be more efficient. We could use it to be more effective in our roles. I think just the labor market. I mean, we exist, Utah, we are blessed to really have a booming economy. And that actually it hurts us a bit too from HR professionals because it's very hard to recruit. And Intermountain Health now sits in 7 states that all have very competitive, labor environments. And I think that's a big challenge. Another challenge that we're facing is union pressure. Like no other time in history. I mean, Utah has generally been a state we've sort of felt the walls around us of that. I've never felt it in my entire career the way we feel it now. Unions want to be in Utah, and it will change the work environment. And we have a president who's very pro-union. We have a lot of Congress people and legislators that are pro-union. So how that will all shake out in Utah will be quite interesting. The other piece that I would say is mobility. People were able to move anywhere they wanted in the country and provide services to an organization. So our landscape to recruit now is very, very different. We are competing with Colorado. Yeah. We are competing with California. We are competing. And even if we don't like it, we are.
That's interesting.
And so Utah has not always been known to be the best payer in the country. So that's really challenged our compensation because we are competing against all of these places.
Heather, we have just 30 seconds left. I want to thank you for all of your time this morning. And I want to ask you just one last question. You ran through those challenges. They're significant. What's one thing that gives you hope?
What is one thing that gives me hope? You know what? When I look at my teenage boys, it gives me hope because if there's anything that's constant, it's change. And I think you have to lean into it. My kids are incredibly hopeful. They really believe that the world is their oyster. And so I think we've got to take that on as human resources professionals and just professionals in this workspace. I think if we just lean into it, it'll all work out. It'll be different, but it'll work out.
Great. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Lauren.
This is lovely. Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy your conference.